I'm very excited for the very final panel of this conference because we're going to hear from top officials and enforcers, and they're going to present what they do within their agencies. And I'm more than curious to see. I have no idea what they're going to say, whether or not they indeed are going in the direction to improve antitrust, or if they see that there is a room to actually change the rules such as they are. And so for that, I'm pleased to introduce, and I will stick with your first name for reasons that you will understand. First, Felipe, who is the general coordinator of the antitrust analysis at CAGI, which is the Brazilian competition agency. After Felipe, we will hear from Stefan, who is the Chief Data and Technology Insight Officer at the UK Competition Market Authority that Bill was mentioning, not as a way to tease us, because Bill is not doing that, I know, but it's very good to see that we can wrap up and close the loop here. And then we will hear from Jan, who is the head of the digital economy unit at the French competition agency, the Autorité de la Concurrence. So the idea for the discussion is the following. We've given them all 20 minutes to present. In the meantime, of course, please feel free to enter some more questions in the Q&A, because we're going to have then 20 minutes for discussion. And without further ado, I will give the floor to you, Felipe.
Well, thank you very much, Thibault. I would like to thank Codex Center for the invitation and congratulate you and your team for organizing this amazing conference. It's important to emphasize here that the opinions expressed in my presentation do not represent the official position of the Brazilian Antitrust Authority. My aim here is to give you a brief overview about how we are dealing with the challenges related to the incorporation of new technologies in antitrust activities. I will not go through any technicalities, mainly because I'm not an expert in the field, but also because I think it would be more interesting to guarantee time to discussion. The development of new technologies, such as artificial intelligence and blockchain, for instance, brings several opportunities for antitrust agencies. And the concept of computational antitrust is very powerful, because it allows us to organize several sparse approaches into a program of action and research based on a problem-solving vision. Computational antitrust, in my perception, should be understood as a toolkit in constant evolution, which offers antitrust agencies a range of alternatives based on innovations. This implies, therefore, the need to test those innovations, possibly make several mistakes, and consequently redesign our initiatives. That said, it's essential to emphasize that it's not innovation that should drive the agency's initiatives, but its policy goals that should guide the new techniques and strategies based on those technologies. In other words, once the agency goals have been well defined, we should look for techniques on that toolkit that are methodologically aligned with the purpose of the antitrust policy. This implies, therefore, that different agencies will be able to test different techniques with different results as well. There is no one-size-fits-all approach, as agencies have different institutional capacities, are embedded in different legal frameworks, and their policy instruments also vary. So I'm going to talk briefly about how the Brazilian authority is dealing with the opportunities opened by the computational antitrust. One of the main opportunities is how technological tools can facilitate the work of antitrust investigators and case handlers. Automating procedures can exponentially increase agencies' efficiency. The analysis of documents and evidences, the standardization of answers and reports, among others, can result in transversal initiatives, that is, those capable of being reproduced after adaptation by other agencies around the world. Here in Brazil, our IT unit, in collaboration with case handlers and researchers from a local university, are developing a tool to automate the detection of legal arguments presented by lawyers in their defenses, in order to enable both the identification of legal reasoning and the standardized treatment of responses. We think it will guarantee not only the due process, but increase legal certainty in our proceedings. Developing tools based on natural language processing is a challenge, but one that can significantly impact the work of antitrust agencies. In addition to the issue of efficiency, computational antitrust may be the most suitable way to increase the potential for detecting infringements and thus the deterrent power of antitrust authorities. Perhaps the proactive approach is the frontier towards which all agencies intend to walk. Computational antitrust provides the tools, but each agency will need to identify the best path. And this path will not necessarily be the shortest or the easiest one, but rather the one that allows each country within its institutional framework and institutional capacities to progress step by step. Difference in data availability, the diversity of market structures and bidding rules, for instance, make cross-cutting response very difficult. For instance, machine learning algorithms for detecting cartels or markets more prone to abuse of market power will need to be internalized and adapted in order to guarantee the results' accuracy. In Brazil, we advanced in the development of screening tools to detect cartels, but more complex techniques, such as artificial intelligence techniques, will require improvements in our team's technical maturity. For example, if the local judiciary is prepared to accept its use, if its use is in line with regulations, so on and so forth. Thus, it's possible that initially the implementation of artificial intelligence techniques will be more viable for internal use by the authorities. In other words, for intelligence use. Furthermore, it's essential to emphasize that antitrust agencies will also be affected by artificial intelligence regulations and its requirements regarding the guarantee of fairness and transparency criteria. I believe that debate around new technologies for solving antitrust problems should guarantee space not only for the evangelists, those who seek to highlight the opportunities, the potential brought by its implementation, but also by the apocalyptic ones, those who emphasize the risks and uncertainties regarding its results. This will provide the decision makers with a broad comprehension of all variables involved. This, relevant to antitrust policy, must be embedded in the design of the new computational antitrust tools. Otherwise, we will create an environment of institutional schizophrenia in which will coexist initiatives fully adherent to the antitrust policy and others that are unable to dialogue with policy purposes. In conclusion, I believe that computational antitrust should be implemented not from an optimistic or pessimistic perspective, but from a realistic one. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much. I think I'm going to give the floor immediately to you, Stefan, so we can then have time for more discussions. You should be able to share your screen if necessary. Is it where? Yeah, perfect. And the answer is yes, it's working.
Yes, the problem was looking at my slides and turning myself off at mute at the same time. Thank you very much for the invite to be here, Thibaut. It's really great to be speaking with a bunch of people with similar experience with Felipe and Jan, and many similar interests, such as yourself and the attendees, Thibaut. So my name's Stefan Hunt, as you said. and I run a unit called Data Technology Analytics at the Competition and Markets Authority. I'm going to be really drawing primarily on that body of experience in the next 20 minutes. So what I'm going to talk about today is how we've kind of formed our team, just to give you a bit of background about what the team's like. I'm going to focus mostly on casework, a number of cases where we've supported, in some cases at a major role, focus a bit on building technology, developing techniques, and then some reflections. So the unit began starting in October 2017, when we got permission from the board to set up a new unit. So our CEO, Andrea Coscelli, championed the setting up of the unit, and he actually effectively advertised for my role through an interview with the Financial Times in the November of that year. So I personally joined a bit over 3 years ago in August 2018. And we started hiring for people very soon afterwards. And we really continued hiring the next year, and we got a great response. And as we started grappling with the big tech firms and other big issues, we started recruiting more. In fact, we started building in a behavioral unit, actually coming up for 2 years ago now, as well as the various other units. So we've had mostly organic growth, and we're nearly up at 50 people, which means we're actually really quite sizable when it comes to competition agencies. So in terms of what skills we have, we started off with data scientists and a little bit of engineers. So really focusing on people who can use machine learning and code. And the engineers are particularly hardcore techies who are building our platforms and software engineering and this kind of thing. However, very, very quickly, literally just a couple of months in, I realized that this wasn't going to be enough. The data scientists and the engineers, they really want to work with data and code, unsurprisingly, and they see their professional domain as being data scientists and engineers. They're not competition professionals per se. So unlike the economists, who some can be very quantitative, but even then they're happy to be embedded in cases and doing much work that isn't primarily quantitative. This isn't true for at least quite a number of our data scientists and engineers. This is a bit of a pastiche. Some are more interested. So we very quickly realized that we needed this additional capability, which is data and technology insight. And these are people with hard science backgrounds, but they recognize and they actually appreciate and they want their impact. They want to be working primarily in the qualitative domain. And in fact, one of my engineers, who I've referred to a bit, she's just moved over from engineering into this team. So she's got this brilliant technical background, but she realizes she can have the most impact through being in data and technology insights. I've also already mentioned the behavioral hub. We also have a digital forensics and e-discovery capability. Now we carefully prioritized our work from the beginning. We focused initially on consumer and merger cases. So I'm actually going to start off with the consumer case, but I think you'll find it's actually quite indicative of what's possible in terms of competition. So a project we did from the very beginning was trying to think about how do we deal with fake and misleading online reviews. This project illustrates 3 main capabilities that we bring to the table when it comes to competition agencies. So we first of all started on focusing on the platforms where reviews were bought and sold, and this was in particular Facebook and eBay. And the firms were making technical commitments on what they were going to be able to do to take down buying and selling of fake and misleading online reviews. And my team's role really was to sit in the meetings with parties, and effectively you can think of us as pardon my language, a bullcrap detector. And it really made a difference. Like our ability to understand what they were saying, but also to be able to challenge was very important. At the same time, right from the beginning, we started working on identifying problems on various sites that hosted online reviews. And here's an example of some early work. So effectively, we've been tipped off for a company. This is the red dot right in the center. We then scraped the reviewers of all of this seed company. And then we looked at all the companies that these reviewers had then reviewed themselves. We found this very unusual networks. So for example, in this you can see these green dots that are all circled in the center. There's individuals that all of them reviewing an American asphalt firm, all of them reviewing a Korean antiques firm. This is obviously highly suspicious and was really, so we had to find that we could identify issues with various types of network analytics. But it turns out to be sort of even better than identifying, because this original way of identifying actually had already been figured out by our consumer team, and they'd literally been manually going in Excel, looking at individual review, and then recording in Excel. One of our engineers, his first day on the job, on his own initiative, he did the scraping. He created this first version of this chart by himself in his first afternoon on the job. Obviously, we're subject to legal processes where, if you can write stuff in code, you can literally be doing it 1,000 times, 10,000 times, 100,000 times more than might otherwise be possible. So it's really a game changer in us being able to detect and identify problems. Ultimately, the work that we did on scraping and identifying fake reviews was a major part of deciding where to focus. And the third major thing that now we focus on, the second stage of the investigation, is working with Google and with Amazon. And right now, so the role of the team, this is the third thing that we bring, is actually really trying to understand the algorithms that Google and Amazon have. And obviously our job is to work with our consumer colleagues to figure out, from a legal perspective, are the firms doing enough to understand, enough to take down fake and misleading online reviews. So I'll focus on another early case as well, which was our digital advertising market study, where we were focused in particular on Google and Facebook, but obviously a significant focus of that is going to be on Google search. Now, we really wanted to understand in a quantitative and rigorous way the magnitude of Google's scale advantage in search, right? We really, rather than, yeah, sure, we know there's some, but how big is it? Does it really matter? So what we did was we went to Google and Bing. We got 1 week of all in Google and Bing searches, all searches in the UK. This is half a terabyte of data, and moreover, we used an encryption mesh, and we hashed, because there's actually lots of personal data, names and addresses and these kind of things in search data. We actually used the same hash across the two, so we can then match, look at the same exactly the same searches that occur on both Google and Bing within a similar week. And this is what we found. Let me take me through this chart. Now, to be clear, this chart would not have been possible without a mix of my engineering team to actually get in the data. We wouldn't have been able to deal with data of this volume otherwise, but then my data science team to do the analytics. So let's take the red line first of all. So this is looking at all of Google searches, and they're being ranked from the most frequent to the least frequent. The most frequent is on the left. And then we say, for those individual searches that are most frequent, what percentage of those searches can Bing see? And of course, for the most frequent searches that Google sees, Bing can see all of them. But as we get into, say, the median search of Google, we can see that actually it's around 25 to 30% of those searches that Bing is actually able to see. And as we get lower, as we move into the bottom 30%, the tail queries, but this is still 3 in 10 queries, right? This is very important for our search behavior. We can see that if it's actually 0.95% of those exact queries is what Bing is able to see. Let's flip that around and look at Google. We can say with Google, you can see that the line is much, much higher. And in particular, if we focus on the tail queries, we can show that on average, in the bottom 30% of queries, actually the percentage that Google can see exactly the same as Bing searches is over 30%. So we've got over 30 times the amount of data that Google is able. So that's, using base 10, that's 1.5 orders of magnitude in terms of better data that they have. That really helps us understand the nature of the scale advantage that Google has. Again, not possible without a team like mine. But it wasn't just that. There's a variety of other things we were able to do. So one was really getting into the nature of technologies. So there's some really quite complicated technologies in terms of tracking that we have to be aware of when it comes to advertising. It's understanding the role of privacy enhancing technologies, understanding personal information management systems. And that engineer I referred to earlier, who's moved from the engineering team to data and technology insight, she was the one leading on all of these things, really making sure we had detailed. She's got a background in software engineering. She's really very technical. She was able to understand these things very well. But it wasn't only that. We also did a whole bunch of stuff on choice architecture for privacy. I'm broadly not going to focus on the behavioral aspects in this presentation. So let's move that forward on that particular study. So we did this work on digital advertising. It meant that in January of this year, we launched a case, a very unusual antitrust case, the Google Privacy Sandbox case. So this is where we're prospectively concerned about the changes that Google will be making, or has said that they're going to be making and will be making to how people are tracked over time, and the concerns here that was actually going to the amount of information that Google would have about each individual would be much higher than other parties, and that would differentially give them a whole bunch of advantage compared to other parties in the market. So it turns out there's lots and lots of different, really quite technical aspects to this. So, for example, the main way that Google is going to put us into buckets is using the federated learning of Cohort. This is a unsupervised machine learning technique that has quite a lot of detail that's really technical and really important to understand. For those who understand federated learning, you'll know that it's on our devices. The information doesn't go centrally. But there's not just that. There's this technology called Turtle Dove. There's lots and lots to do with technology changes to do conversion tracking. There's lots and lots of stuff they're doing to make sure that companies can't hack the way that they could track people over time. It's really important in all of these things to make sure we really understand the technical details so that we can do our job. So we've only had 1.2 full-time equivalent of the team based on this. This is a team of about 7 people, but what we're able to bring to the table is so different in terms of capability that we're really able to catalyze the rest of the resource. Previously, frankly, we'd probably be relying on economists to do this technical work, but these individuals can do much more of it with much less of their time and speed up the whole enterprise of doing this particular type of study. So I'll, in the interest of time, I'll skip through the mobile ecosystems market study. We actually came out with a very big interim report yesterday on mobile ecosystems. I'll skip that, but I guess the point here was going to be there's a lot of very important behavioral analytics you can do on choice architecture as well. But I think it's important when it comes to casework to also highlight the role in mergers. So actually, there's a lot of opportunity for putting data and technology capabilities into merger teams to make sure that we can understand issues in the digital markets properly. Probably our best example of this is with the Facebook's acquisition of Giphy. So one of my data scientists joined that team and was crucial for understanding the main sort of data and foreclosure theory of harm, one of the 3 main theories of harm. Yet, again, a very small amount of his time was able to very significantly catalyze the other colleagues that we had on this particular merger case. And it wasn't only this, so we've had people really involved in a whole bunch of stuff to do with the clouds, that's Google Looker, Salesforce, Tableau, algorithms in the case of Amazon Deliveroo. With Toby Smartbox, we were trying to understand the technicalities of effectively an IP remedy that was proposed by the parties, where they would open up a bunch of code to others. And it was really important that we had technical people who could assess whether those commitments would really deliver or not. But it's not just cases. Felipe referred to the work on document review that they've been doing in Brazil, which is great to hear, and Felipe, we should probably chat more. One of the things that we were doing, we built a whole new pipeline for how to deal with submissions of documents. This is our new evidence submission portal. And so we're able to take in millions of documents now through the cloud and automatically and immediately verify whether the documents are in the right format or not, and actually reject submissions that aren't like that. So that was obviously our engineering team leading on this. But moreover than that, now we've got our own thing that we've built. We can actually add in lots of our own data science-based enrichments that become metadata that are attached to each of the files. So on the left is an example of a text rank, which is a similar algorithm to PageRank, which was the original algorithm that Google used when it's trying to rank different websites from the point of view of search. And this is can be used to actually summarize documents. It identifies the key phrases within documents. So we're actually able now to put that within our evidence, through our evidence submission portal, to make sure that every document we have now, we've got our own capability to actually take out the key phrases. And we've built a number of other data science-based enrichments where we're trying to improve what we're doing in the document review. We've also built a resale price maintenance detector, which was launched at the back end of last year. So that allows us to get data and analyze when we think there might be resale price maintenance. So in terms of technologies, it's also been really important to develop techniques. So we published a paper in January this year, Algorithms, How They Can Reduce Competition and Harm Consumers, that tries to lay out the different theories of harm where we think algorithms could be relevant. And then right now, what we're trying to do is make sure we're building out the capability to deal with the various different types of harm. So for example, I mentioned on online reviews, that's an example of ineffective platform oversight. That's the more general category of harm. So we're trying to make sure that we understand now what are the kind of techniques that we need in order to be able to understand and prove whether a firm's algorithms are sufficient or not. And we're also thinking about a variety of other theories of harm and how we can build up the relevant techniques. Another thing that's important is horizon scanning as well. To think about and understand different issues that might be coming along the pipeline. Mostly we're thinking about this as a qualitative piece of work. And we're thinking about, started writing a bunch of technology primers, but I think there's potentially something that we could do with some forms of automation. And that's one thing that we're exploring as well. Some reflections. So we're very much focusing on building a new technologist profession, and it's not just us. It's great to see Jan on the call as well, and we know that the Canadians, the Australians have in the last few months made some significant rejigging and some increase and expansion in what they're doing. The Commission has just had a very significant upgrade of its technology team within DG Comp, and a whole variety of other agencies as well. So we've got this new technologist profession. We're working with lawyers, economists, and others. It's important to understand what we're really talking about here is quite a spectrum of different skill sets. It's important to understand and know what they are. We technically work across all competition cases, but the fact is the vast majority of cases we're working on are the digital ones. I think there's the chance to radically change how we approach cases. So for example, I gave 2 examples where there was a really small amount of resource that we were able to put in, could really catalyze very significantly and change how cases are being done. But it's not just casework, it's very much developing technology, our own technology as well, and techniques. We're using a wide variety of tools from engineering, lots of different kind of pipeline technologies, especially in AWS. Lots of different machine learning techniques as well. We think we're really using the right tools because we've got a wide variety of people with a wide array of expertise. I guess one thing I would caution from some things I've seen from some academic papers is some focus on techniques that I think sound quite interesting, and certainly we're well aware of, but I think we really can't see ourselves using those techniques at all in the next few years, because we really don't think they're applicable to the use cases at least in practical competition law and economics, and we'd be very happy to discuss some more of that if people wanted to. Lastly, the last point I want to focus on. So what we're talking about here is if I was going to be a management consultant, they call this normally the digital transformation, because that's the sort of language they like to use, of organizations. So if we're talking about the digital transformation of competition agencies, there's absolutely the opportunity for us to benefit from the same factors that firms have been benefiting from themselves as well. So to the extent that we can build these capabilities in different agencies, we can really get network effects as we build our own capabilities and we're able to share with them. That's obviously going to be most important when it comes to digital products and that we've developed, where there can be potentially very low marginal costs in sharing them together. We have in some ways already started sharing code with a few other agencies. It could include the platform. We've got our own bespoke platform. It could include best scraping libraries that we have, some natural language processing. We're very excited about the opportunity to work together with other agencies and co-build technology. We'll have shared GitHub libraries that we'll be working on. And so it was really good to hear Felipe talking about some of the problems in intelligence, which are really, really hard. We think that actually being able to work with other agencies would allow us to make more progress on some of these problems we think are particularly difficult.
Beautiful. I was typing questions. You are getting me very excited right now. But I'm not going to ask questions right now. I'm first going to give the floor to you, Jan. And I think you may have some new projects you want to discuss. So I'm very excited about this. And then I will be asking my very complex question to the three of you.
Okay, let me share my screen. Hope it works.
It works. Yes, that will be, quite ironical, right?
Yes. So thank you for the invitation, Thibault and Codex. And so I would talk about the French experience. So I'm Jan Gutman, the head of the Digital Economy Unit. And so this unit was created in September 2020. So we're very new. We're kind of a toddler unit, you can say. And we're a support unit like the chief economist team at the Autorité de la Concurrence. And in the future, maybe we could have our own cases, but currently we're kind of short-staffed. We're only 4 in my unit. So we're very much smaller than Stefan's unit, where there are 50. I'm very jealous. And so our resources are better used assisting case team that developing our own cases. And so we're better use of our data scientists assisting current case team. Regarding my team, so we're 4, myself, 2 data scientists, and 1 lawyer. And we have 4 objectives. First one is to develop new tools, so investigating methods, technical tools, allowing the authority to deepen its understanding of a digital economy. The second objective is to work in cooperation with the authorities team involved in digital matter. And so we worked on several cases like Google neighboring rights, a lot of Google cases because there's also Google News Corp, for example. Our third objective is to act in close cooperation with other competition or regulatory authorities in Europe or beyond, and also with a relevant service within the government in France. And a fourth objective is to develop contact with the academic world and research institutions. And for the rest of the presentation, I will focus on the first objective, that is to develop new tools. And to develop new tools, I think there's 2 ways to do that for a data unit. First one is a case handler centric. And in this case, usually you answer to a specific need. The case handler has a problem and you want to provide a solution. And there's immediate application, and that's what's really important is that you can have valuable feedback from the case handler to improve your tool. Usually you're working under a time constraint. And one very important thing is to focus on the user interface. One point of attention I would like to mention is that we conduct an in-house survey inside the authority, and we found that the case handlers can be afraid of digital tools. they fear that they will lose more time than actually gain it with using this kind of tools. And so we need to appease these fears. And so that's why it's very important to focus on the user interface. You need the case handler wants to use these tools. So that's one way to do it. And there's also another way that is technology-centric. In this way, you have no case handler, and usually it's more about experimentation or exploration. And sometimes projects that could be useful directly or indirectly, but you don't know when you start this project. But one thing I want to mention that there's a lot of spillover effects. As a new service, this kind of project, it helps us define a working relationship, for example, with the IT team on low-stakes, non-priority projects. This way, we were able to work how to build virtual machines, for example. And so when a very urgent case arrives, you already know how to build a virtual machine with the IT team. One thing I want to mention is sometimes the IT team is kind of afraid of us because we want to use a lot of very complex things and we need a lot of authorization. So they can be afraid. And so it's very important to have nice working relationship with this unit. So you have freedom of exploration. It's usually long-term projects, but can also absorb any shift of activity. That means that when you have a lot of cases where you need to support the antitrust unit, you can put this project on standby, and they can be indole project. And when there's a low activity, you can put more resources on this. And on this project, you don't need to focus on the user interface. You need to focus on creating a proof of concept. You need at the end of a project to have something to show to some people. Usually your chief. And so I think that these both types of projects are needed for any data unit. And you can also think that one is the Apple way of doing things and the other one is the Google way. And so now for the presentation, I will present two projects, one case handler centric and one technology centric. So first one is a screening tool. So it's kind of basic for data scientists. And you answer to a very specific need. A case handler wants to monitor one or several websites. And we can all agree that it's very time consuming for human. And it also can be very boring. But it's very easy to do it with digital tools. And so at the authority, we use a Python library that is called Scrappy for backend and HTML and for the web pages. And what's also important with these screening tools is that you need to avoid a black box feeling, because you can say to the case handler, well, the screening tool is working and in 2 months you will have the results. It won't work. And so we created a dashboard using the Dash technology. That's the same one that I use on the website, for example, for the dashboard of the COVID pandemic, for example. So it's the same technology. We also created a demo project that is available to all the case handler at the authority, so they can see an example of a screening tool. And one more thing is also very important, that we add feedback from one case handler for the screening tools. And you need to focus on simplicity, because my data scientist that work on this tool, at the beginning, he was full of ideas, fancy indicators that use temporal series and so on and so on. And it was a disaster, a total failure, because the case handler didn't understand that was presented to them. And so on the screening tool, you need to focus on the simplicity, easy indicators to understand, and you can save the fancy analysis for the end report at the end of the screening period. So that's very important to understand. So that's one concrete application of a case handler centric project that we did at the Digital Economy Unit. And now for the technology centric approach, so one new project, it's references between decisions. So it's an ongoing project that started with one simple idea. Opinion and decisions in the computational field reference previous cases. That's the principle of jurisprudence. That's how it works. And so maybe by detecting and compiling all the codes from all the authorities' publication, could we identify the important ones? So that's the basic idea, very simple. And so how did we implement it? First, we gather all the opinions and decisions of the authority from 29 to 2020. So it's a little bit less than 600 opinions and decisions. And we choose 2009 because it was the creation at the authority at its current form. Before that, we were the Council of Competition. So that's why, and it's ranged to 11 years. So we think it was sufficient data. After that, we created a tool that can identify the references to the publication of the authority inside these documents. So we focus only on the authority publications. Why? Because it's easier. That's the answer. We know the nomenclature, we know the format of the authority decision, and so it was easier to create a tool to identify them. One way to, for the future, maybe we can design the tool to also recognize, for example, the references to the Commission or to some French jurisdictions. And so we gather more than 10,000 codes identified, representing less than 5,000 publications. So that's the end results. And all these opinions decision can be found on the website of the authority. So we use only public available data. So what are the early results? So the most quoted decision is a decision from 2007 that's concerning France Telecom in the sector of internet high speed. It was quoted 88 times by 41 publications. And there's two main reasons why this decision is quoted. First one is the telecom relevant markets, but only for about 1/5 of the publication. And the other reason is because it's a standard for the denigration practice. So this first result is very good because we identified a very important decision that set the standard for the authority for the denigration practice. So we're kind of happy. One other results, for example, most references by a decision. So it's a very recent one from 2020, December, regarding practices implemented in the mass retail food distribution sector by Carrefour and Tesco. But in these cases, more than 90% of the references are related to business secrecy. So it's kind of useless. You don't understand much. So you need to regard all the results are not very interesting. One more thing we can do is that we can do some math, because you can create the graph of the authority's publication, where the publication have the nodes of a graph and the references are the edges. And so you should be familiar with graph because Stefan's presentations had a lot of them. And so what are the questions that can be posed? Is the final graph connected? is there a path between any two decisions of the authority, or what is the partition of the underlying connected subgraph? Because if your graph is not connected, you can divide it between connected subgraphs. Also, what is the main distance between two publications? That are some questions that can be asked. And sorry, I wanted to share because we have a picture of the final graph. So beware. Ta-da! And so you can see that we have one big connected subgraph at the center and a lot of tiny subgraphs. And so we were kind of disappointed because we were hoping for some separated subgraph that maybe can be mapped to some specific sectors or maybe specific practices. But no, everything is connected. So we need more work to identify what is interesting in this work. And so that's why it's still an ongoing project. There's a lot of cluster, and you can see all the references plotting from some points. And for the size of the image, the final one, it's more than 30 megabytes, which is kind of huge for an image. And if you want a zoom on one, sorry, here, on one part of this graph, so you can see here some of the publication here and all of the quotes from this publication. And so you can see the relation between some decision or opinions. And so what we hope to do in the future, it may be to have an interactive graph. You can browse on your browser, on a website. And when you click on one publication, you can have all the data or the infos related to that. So that's what we're hoping to do. And we hope that doing more work, we can identify all the important decisions, and maybe it can help new case handler, for example, to what decision they need to read to understand specific practices or specific markets. And so that's all for my presentation.
Thank you very much. We have quite a few questions in the chat. I also have quite a few questions, so I've tried my best to cluster those questions into 3 different segments. So, and some of those questions might be directed to just one of you, but of course, feel free to jump in if you have something to say. And some of those questions are directed to the 3 of you. The first is actually for you, Jan. You mentioned the fact that the case handlers may be afraid of using computational tools because they have the feeling, you know, oh, it's too complex, it's not for me, I'm going to lose time. So I'm wondering, how did you deal with that? Was it just a matter of improving the interface, as you mentioned, or did you also have to organize training sessions? And I suspect the question might be also relevant for Stefan and Felipe.
You need to optimize the interface, but we didn't do any training station, but on the opposite, we do a lot of communication internally at the authority. We communicate a lot about our works, how they are working, and we're doing a lot of demos on internal webinar to show how it's working and what can be done with these tools, because one of the things we found that is the case handler have no idea what these tools can do. And so they usually have very down-to-earth needs and down-to-earth ideas about what can these tools do. And so you need to go to them and to present a lot of the works you're doing. You cannot work on your own like a black box. You need to show internally what you're doing. And at the authority, we have implemented internal webinars to show our work, for example.
And have you seen that the attendance is growing? Is it easier for you to get people to attend the webinars?
No, we have a kind of a core audience around 40 people. But okay, it's very good for us.
It's good. Yeah, it's very good. Stefan, I know we discussed that in private, so maybe there are some things you may want to share there.
So, I mean, I had a general thought, which is building on what Jan just said, which is, I mean, so much of building up these teams, I mean, there's just a lot of very practical skills in terms of how to engage with colleagues, how to, I noticed one of the other questions was about kind of getting buy-in, how to make sure you do that. So, for example, my first few months in the job, I was lucky to I had a monthly meeting with our CEO. So you saw the slides were very visual that I presented. So getting really visual slides in front of the CEO really early to kind of demonstrate what was going on. Lots of try to explain stuff in numbers, so the impact of that these tools can have. And obviously, in presentations, normally get the clients to actually give the presentations mostly. They're going to be much more persuasive about the value and the impact to their work than we can possibly be.
Great.
So
beautiful pictures, big numbers is the key, right?
Yeah. Also anecdotes. Anecdotes are really important, right? So, for example, I gave the anecdote of my engineer Tom, who built that first version of the chart and literally his first afternoon on the job. Things like that. And then there's lots of other small anecdotes we had of little things. So, for example, one of my data scientists, one of the teams, was really interested in this pricing data for a particular product, and it was going to take them around 2 weeks or so to literally manually download all of these different things and then net them together. So they came to ask the data scientist whether he could help. So it turns out all he did, he looked in the HTML code for the site. Turns out there was a download button that had been hidden. So you just unhide the download button and literally save 2 weeks of work in about 10 to 15 minutes. So little things like that can really can really make a difference, right? People remember it.
Great. And Felipe, I'm curious as to how you're building the expertise is one thing, but the adoption is another. So what is your experience there?
Yes, one of the more successful strategy we used here in Brazil, we tried to consult case handlers and investigators to consult them about actual problems that we could help them to solve with new tools. Then they gave us insights and inputs to solve actual problems they have. And that was a very successful approach and in the beginning of the project.
All right, so showing how to indeed help with what they do already, instead of saying you're going to be able to do even more, right? And my second question, and by the way, so many of you remain in the chat right now. I'm very grateful for that. So feel free to enter questions in the Q&A. We have about 20 minutes for questions. My other question is not regarding the adoption by the case handlers, but how do you make sure that the top management will actually give you the budget to hire the people? That's also a question I have, but how do you communicate? And Stephanie already answered that one. Beautiful graphics, big numbers, anecdotes that you may want to use. But yeah, maybe how, I suppose that the team, was created and you got the approval, of course, at the time of Isabel. But what is your strategy with the top management?
Well, since we were a newly created unit, we kind of get a token of goodwill. That means there was a need for the creation of my unit. And so at the beginning, the people were eager to have the help of the unit. And after that, you need to deliver. You need to help them. You need to gain time for the case handler with new tools, or to help them understand a very complex digital markets. And we kind of deliver internally. The case handler were very happy with what we provided. And so we are building on that. And now the case handler come directly to us to ask for help. And so we're kind of goodly established inside the authority.
I think, Stefan, you kind of had the same experience, right? Trying to convince the people, and then they actually come to you. And it's a bit of a reverse power relationship in a sense. I mean, there is no power within the agency, but I suspect this is what you saw, right?
Yeah, certainly. And building on what Felipe was saying, going out to find other people's problems.
Yeah.
Just before my dead scientists arrived, the initial set, we did a whole bunch of kind of vague sort of collaborative exercises with the whole of the variety of the rest of the organization. Lots of kind of post-it notes on walls, trying to come up with all the different problems we could potentially tackle. So we actually had kind of 35 different possible problems from around the different agency, again, before we really had a team. And that was really helpful because, I then take those to our CEO, who's very decisive, and he's, look, I want you to do, 3, 7, 3, 7, and 17. But obviously he's got buy-in right from the teams are buy-in because we developed with them. Then he's got buy-in, and that's when I started doing in the first few months, going back with all the visual things, and then so he can see straight away what we're doing. And then we just really keep feeding back to him very well. We actually stopped doing all the visual stuff after a few months. He didn't need that immediate feedback because he'd already got. So then it was much more about bringing, based on what Jan said. I mean, it's all going to be based upon what you deliver. So it was actually quite a while for a variety of reasons. It was a couple of years before we really did the first. I think you've got Bill Kovacic on here. So Bill, remember, it's actually a couple of years before we first went to the board with all but we really thought incredibly carefully about that paper and really designed it very well. So it was quick for them to read, but conveyed a lot of information really well. And it's really interesting as you create these different pieces of communication, how useful it is to reuse. So, for example, actually, we've recently been sharing the original strategy paper that we did a bit over a year ago, and then we did a refresh a couple of months ago. We've been sharing shareable versions of those with, really all of the other agencies that would like to see them. And so again, this is talking about what we can do in terms of helping catalyze other agencies, and of course, then them helping catalyze us. So we think, been thinking very hard about influencing the CEO throughout the lifetime of the unit.
Yeah, great. And so still regarding the adoption, I'm now something that you kind of mentioned without being too specific on purpose, I think, is the type of tech that you wouldn't use because you think it's not ready or will never be ready. And we had a question in the chat regarding transparency. And indeed, it seems to me, and I'm wondering as to whether this is the type of tool that you had in mind, that if you use unsupervised machine learning, it might be consistent with what you expect, but it might be very hard for you to explain how the machine came to the result. And so is it the type of tech that you had in mind? And I guess the question is also for the three of you, is there a space where you think, well, I will not go there because I'm not sure if I can deliver. And even though I may be able to deliver results, I need to be able to explain, how I came to the results. So maybe Felipe, if I can start with you. Which tech are you trying to avoid at all costs?
Well, we are still evaluating the challenge to implement artificial intelligence at all, because we still waiting for the Brazilian regulation bill here in Brazil is being analyzed in the Brazilian Congress, and we are still waiting until we have a full scenario about how regulation will see that kind of technique implement to investigate markets or companies. And certainly will be one of our first implementations after the regulation is approved or not.
Great, thank you. Jan, anything you want to share?
For the moment, we didn't have the opportunity to use AI in actual cases, but we are thinking of using some techniques like NLP, but for a technology called Centric project. First, we want to experiment with it, understand it, maybe how we can explain to our case handler before we can use it in an actual case.
Yeah, makes sense. Stefan, can you disclose the tech that you had in mind?
Sure, I can. So I will get there. I'll get there in a second, though. So I'll say, in terms of techniques, I think we'd be happy to work with. So we've certainly used some unsupervised techniques. So, for example, the page rank algorithm that I was discussing for summarizing documents, that's an unsupervised technique. The reason we feel it's okay to use is because nothing's really resting on it. It's just helping the case teams get to documents and have a quick look at whether they think it may be important or not, but it doesn't affect their judgment of importance or not at all. So the key thing is a document important or not, and how would it be used, of which it's not, it doesn't really pertain to that. There's a bunch of different supervised machine learning techniques. We've got some named entity recognition techniques that we've been using. Very interestingly, actually, once you start building some of these, we originally did it. We had a COVID task force where we're dealing with lots of complaints. That was where we built some of this tech. But then it turns out you can actually deploy it for document review, at least some of the code. So that's the supervised technique. So there's a whole variety of techniques you can use, and it really just depends upon the task at hand. In general, actually, quite a lot of the stuff we've done is deterministic. So it's not necessarily using machine learning. So it's just a question of really making sure the code's right, making sure you've got sufficient quality controls for that. The stuff I was referring to was, I'd seen some stuff talking about agent-based modeling, for example, and there was some stuff I saw on the use of machine learning in another paper. Agent-based modeling, it's actually, as a technique, is of course fine, right? I mean, it gets used in, say, evolutionary biology all the time and is very effective. In principle, it can be used actually within, I think, within markets. I mean, I've seen a couple of good attempts to do it. So there's a really good mortgage paper, about 5 or 6 years old, and another one that's about 4 or 5 years old on the bond market, which they use some agent-based modeling but it's really hard to use agents-based modeling within sort of market systems, because the behavioral assumptions that you need are normally just too strong, and you don't have enough data, and normally the systems are too complicated. So I can't see us using any agent-based modeling not in the next 5 years.
So first of all, you're getting me worried, because you mentioned COVID as a way to foster more tech. I know that Brexit also played a role because you had more cases. So if all we need is Brexit and COVID for computational antitrust to be adopted, I'm not sure we are where we want to be. But as to agent-based modeling, so first of all, we do have a paper coming on the subject. I have no idea what they're going to conclude, and I'm also working on it. And I think it may depend on whether you want to use agent-based modeling to predict for sure what's going to happen on the market, or if you may want to use it in a way to indeed document the uncertainty. And so I've seen a lot indeed of agent-based modeling being used to say this is for sure, the effect of a merger. And there again, it's too many assumptions, and I very much share your view. But I'm more than happy, and hopefully we can discuss next year to see if you think there is a place for agent-based modeling to achieve another objective, but still to the adoption. And this question is just for you, Jan, and then I'll move on to the procedural aspect. So you've showed us a project which, to me, it's absolutely fascinating, using network analysis. I've also conducted studies in the space, so I know it's hard. First of all, people will tell you that it's not because a case is being quoted that this is the most important. So, of course, this is something to take into consideration. But first of all, I was wondering, when you've done the labeling, who did that? Was it you? Was it the lawyer in the team? And which software did you use? Was it Gephi or was it another software?
We didn't use any labeling, because we just take the decision and we just identify automatically the references. So at the core of the project, there's no labeling. After that, it's very useful to add more data and metadata. And so we use the one from the website of the authority, where our communication team usually inputs some data on the website, what is the main practices and what are some of the juridic aspects. And so we're using this data, but so it has already been labeled. And after that, we need to crunch the results, for example, by hand, to understand why this decision is the most quoted, for example. And so for the example I presented, I was the one to do it because what first one, but we need to do it for more, or we need to do it a way to let the machines do our work, but we haven't found it yet. And one of the aspects that is annoying us is the time aspect, because usually the more ancient a decision, the more quoted it can be. And so all the recent decisions maybe can pass under the radar this way. And so we need to think of it and define maybe another metrics, maybe the number of quotation by year. And it's a lot of things we need to work on. That's why it's the early results that can be promising, but a lot of more works to do.
Because then it depends on the type of cases you will have during a certain year, right? And it might be also that you have the opposite problem, in which you have a case is being quoted by another case, another decision, and then you quote the second decision, which is quoting the first one. And so the first one disappears, although it's actually the basis for the case law. We do somehow have only 10 minutes left, and I have 5 questions. So moving on to the procedures, the question is for you, Stefan. You said and you presented the fact that you obtain Google and Bing search queries for just 1 week. I think you had between 3 and 4 billion entry points, if I recall correctly. And so it seems to me that that is the thing that the European Commission couldn't do, right? To get access without a proper investigation behind. And so I'm wondering as to whether you think that all agencies should actually push to obtain a similar power to just go to the premises of companies and say, okay, we want to see the data.
I mean, we did it in the context of a market study. So we had considerable legal power. I mean, I do think market studies are very useful tools, and of course the Commission is moving in that direction with their sort of focus on market investigations. So I think that could be potentially. I may not be as maybe Jan's more up to speed on me than I am on where that stands, but I think that could potentially be a very useful tool indeed. So we use our market studies very much in complement with our competition cases, and it can allow you to I mean, mobile ecosystems is a really good example. Allows us to make much more kind of focus much more on some of the bigger picture issues than necessarily what you have to in order to try and prove and win a competition case.
Indeed. And so one of the new amendments in the DMA yesterday, which was passed, is apparently moving toward the direction of forcing the European Commission, we do not know which unit yet, to publish annual report as to the state of digital competition. So this could be a way potentially for the European Commission to get to those market studies in a different way. Another question I have, and I will start with you, Felipe, is regarding the procedural fairness. It seems to me that it might be a big subject. Potentially, I think it's fair to say that when an agency is facing, one of the big tech, they do have computational power, so it's fine. But in the case of private enforcement, this could be a problem. But in any case, are you discussing within the agency the change of procedural rules to kind of frame and constrain your work, or do you have total freedom to just use computational tools regardless of those issues yet?
Well, in the absence of the federal regulation of artificial intelligence and other technologies, we are free to use any technology we want. But of course, we are concerned about how we could translate the results to our decision makers, and of course for other stakeholders as well. And for us, it's a challenge. But nowadays we can use anything we want.
Okay, Stefan and Jan, I'm curious as to whether you do have those discussions regarding the procedures and how to frame your work so that it is fair to at least the companies being investigated. It could be just a 10-second answer if it's negative, I suppose. So Jan, maybe.
Yeah, it's very important questions. And in my unit, we do a legal analysis if the tool we are using are aligned with our investigation powers, like by the Code of Commerce. And so that's why it's very important to have at least one lawyer in my team, because she can be the one that do this analysis. And so all the competencies are within the unit and it's very more efficient.
Yeah, great. Stefan.
Yeah, sure, it's really important. I mean, we have, so for example, the Regulatory Investigations Protection Act in the UK. Also within data protection legislation, you need to do a data protection impact assessment. So those are the risk assessment tools that we would use to assess what we're doing and make sure that it's, I mean, in particular, we've had less of an issue with methods, but more of an issue with data, making sure that we've kind of, especially when we're collecting any public data, we really need to make sure we've been through those procedures.
Yeah. All right. Yes, indeed. I think this is a question that we will talk about for quite some time. I just want to move on to the last part of my questions regarding the interaction between the agencies, your agency, and the outside world, in a sense, and here especially private companies. To you, Felipe, I'm curious as to whether your agency will consider using the tech designed by a private firm. There are quite a firms right now on the market. I've seen about, I don't know, 5 to 10 this year, which are developing computational antitrust, solutions. Is it something you will consider, or is it a no-go because it's coming from the private market?
Well, I can answer. Today it's a no-go, but we can change in the future. But today we are trying to develop everything in-house.
All right, great. Stefan and Jan, I think it's a very important question. So anything you want to share, Stefan?
I mean, in principle, we'd be prepared to use tools from elsewhere. We haven't found, beyond document review, we haven't found tools that we think that would particularly meet what we need, and we've been focusing on building our own bespoke capability. I would say, however, it's not an either or. So document review is a great example here. It's, for us, we've thought about, we're very much buying some stuff off the shelf. I mean, I don't know whether you'd call it computational antitrust. I mean, certainly you've got continuous active learning built into the document review software. But then this is where I talked about those enhancements that we've made, that our evidence review portal. So it's the mix of those things together. So it's not necessarily build or buy. It can be very much a combination.
Great. Jan?
Yeah, I think it very much depends on the tool, because some very technical tool can be used and there's no problem. But if you're using some unsupervised machine learning that you can't explain afterwards, and also you need to be able to explain your methodology to the judge at the end of a case. And so that's one big problem. If you can understand what's going on, how can you explain it afterwards? And I think that for all the unsupervised machine learning techniques, we need to develop them in-house, because it's kind of too dangerous to externalize it.
It's funny because we have a mirror of the private sector using AI, and potentially the system by itself, right, will collude with another company, and then the question is who's liable. And for you within the agency is indeed being able to explain, why the system reacted that way if it comes from outside. So very interesting. Stefan, the next question is just for you. You've mentioned GitHub, and I'm fascinated by that. I'm not aware of the possibility to make GitHub private. Maybe that is the case, but from what I've used, it's always public. So does it mean that you are willing to work with companies toward providing them with such tools to enable better procedures? That's also the question that Jan is asking in the chat, in a nutshell.
I actually think you can have private
you can? Okay.
GitHub repositories.
Is that what you do?
In part, we're literally just starting to work with other authorities right now. We haven't done stuff where we're sharing things with other parties in the market yet. There's certainly the possibility. So we did build one piece of software that does a particular type of analysis, local area analysis, that can get used in mergers quite a lot. So we bought some software that really significantly increased the speed of doing that. But the issue there is we as an organization are just really reining back from that, from doing that type of analysis. We're doing so much less than we used to, and it's just not worth us maintaining that software. However, it's a good example, because that is something where, in principle, I think we would have been willing to open up that software to everyone in the market. It could, relatively defined analysis that's about kind of establishing facts. So in that particular case, actually having the same software available to everyone could allow merger cases to proceed more quickly. So in principle, for the right kinds of tools, yes. Obviously, anything to do with screening and detection, no.
No, of course. Yeah. All right.
I wanted to add that at the French authority, we have a private GitHub. So
you do?
we're using that, especially for the project I presented.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I'm just going to give you about 30 seconds to conclude and to convince people to vote for you in the presidential debate fashion. There is one more remaining question if you want to address it. Raphael is asking if the tools can be used by students for hackathon. I guess you kind of answered the question right now, but in any case, if we could start with you, Felipe, if there is a final thought you would like to share with us.
Well, I think it's a very interesting time to implement computational antitrust tools to agencies, and I think the debate Codex and you are stimulating. It's very useful, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you very much. Stefan.
I'm really excited to be speaking on this panel and to be starting. So we've been internally focused for the beginning. That was really important for all the reasons we've just discussed about building up support and building the unit. We're starting to now focus more. We have been talking to other agencies actually throughout. But even more recently, the last year, we've been increasing the amount we speak to other agencies. I'm really excited by the fact that we're now speaking more externally. I think there's a really great opportunity, as I said, for us to work together. Yeah. We could be making steady progress. We could be kind of a local train. We could be like the Air in Paris and kind of proceeding along with a nice, good pace. Or if we can work together, if we can build up these networks, if we can all benefit from the low marginal cost of sharing digital products, maybe we can be the TGV and we can be going much faster. And I hope that together we can make sure that we're building a TGV.
Yes, thank you very much. We just opened competition actually, so it will be also very interesting to see how companies will try to compete and develop adversarial system. But that is something for next year conference. Thank you very much, Jan. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, data analysis from all the competition authority unite to echo the sage of Stefan.
Yes, thank you very much. I think most of the people, I see so many attendants yet, and it's almost 9 p.m. here in Paris and Amsterdam. So thank you to the three of you very much. What I would like to do now to conclude the conference is to just share a few thoughts, and I promise you will take more than just 5 minutes. We've reached the end of the Computational Antitrust first annual conference. Before anything, I do have to say thank you. Thank you to the Codex team, to Roland Vogel for his support. Thank you to all the speakers. And most of all, thank you to all of you who came in great numbers, in fact, by the 100, which was a beautiful surprise. And thank you to the entire team at the Computational Antitrust Project, Theodora, Alex Mora, Alexandra, Jan, Glenn, Alessia, Carol, and Ben. I am pleased to report, and quite a few of you have been asking the questions throughout the conference, that the entire conference has been recorded. The videos will be made available in January of next year, along with the script of our discussions. So make sure you subscribe to our newsletter to be alerted of the publication and our forthcoming article. Now, let me just take 2 minutes to reflect upon what we've heard during these 3 days. On Monday, we talked about the objectives of computational antitrust. We have delimited the scope, and it appeared that computational antitrust is particularly useful to detect anti-competitive practices. It can also play an essential role in connecting competition agencies to market reality. So we have heard that computational antitrust poses technical problems and questions concerning fundamental rights, something that we just discussed. And here I'm delighted to say that lawyers have an essential role to play. On Tuesday, we explored several projects that will serve as pilots for agencies and companies. The majority of our discussions yesterday resolved around machine learning, and more specifically, the computational antitrust ability to connect antitrust agencies not with the outside world, but with themselves, meaning their own case law, which is something that Jan just presented. We discussed the absolute necessity of creating a representative body of data, which by default, as we mentioned, is complicated when the data is jurisprudential. That said, computational antitrust can provide a better understanding of doctrinal movements, the case law, and we saw together that it can also be used to draft legislation and court decision. Today, finally, we have analyzed how competition agencies can act based on the research published at the Computational Antitrust Project. We discussed merger control as a natural candidate, as indeed agencies and companies, when it comes to mergers, have a common interest in improving it. The same is true for antitrust remedies because they give rise to costly follow-ups on both sides. My personal take is the following. I think we cannot afford not to explore and build computational antitrust capacities. We have explored many places where to start, such as merger control, cartel detection, etc. I think it's fair to say that in a few years will come the time for us to discuss how computational antitrust will change not only the method, but also the substance of antitrust, leading us to explore complexity theory, evolutionary economics, and more. Overall, I'm confident that the future of antitrust law is bright. We have seen during the course of the last 3 days that we can create convergence in a highly polarized field. Convergence, in my view, requires to develop the right tools, to gather the right data, and also to stay kind with each other. So take care of yourself, and if you can, someone else too. Bye-bye.